Okay, so let's go ahead and get started then. Are you all right with that? I'll let people in as they come in. Cool. So like we said, welcome. We're lucky this week. We have two special guests that I'm always excited to have them uh, be a part of anything that we work on because they're just really cool gente, man. They're just really nice people. Um, and so I'll introduce them real quick if it's all good with are you guys ready to? All right. So this is Gustavo and Natalia, and they're a part of a fandango group that we have here for Son Jarocho that is part of the it started out kind of like as a part of the Chicano Studies department, but then they also people from outside the department started being a part of it as well. And it's called Las Brujas Jaraneras, and they just it's just kind of like a cool like unfortunately I've never been able to go because it's always like when I have to work. But I always watch videos and I get like hella jealous because I don't get to go and jam with everybody. But now I have more freedom, so whenever things get easier on Fridays, I'm going to be able to hit that up more. But both of them are PhD students in the Chicano Studies department at UNM. Both of them are also from California, um, which we'll forgive them for that. I'm just kidding. They're both from California, which I love too. The places that they're from too. So Oakland, California, and the San Fernando Valley, right? Is that correct? Um, Los Angeles. And so those are my spots too. Like when I go to California, those are the places I like, man. Like straight up, like San Fernando Valley, Oakland, and San Francisco Bay Area. Like those are my spots. So I'm like when I said that we'll forgive you, I'm lying. I'm jealous a little bit. So one of the things too is like both of them have musical backgrounds too, and it's not all the time in like things that we're studying. But in Son Jarocho, both of them are practitioners. They do it for fun and they like having a good time with it. But they're also involved in danza as well. And both of them are really interested in sharing a lot about these types of traditions and stuff like that from Mexico and other parts of the Southwest even. And it's important to kind of just like reflect on that whenever we're talking about these things because like whenever we get to share that knowledge, it's knowledge that gets to be sustained. And so they're sustainers of precious knowledge that could disappear, and we're not allowing that to happen because people like Natalia and Gustavo keep the traditions going. So without further ado, here's Gustavo and Natalia. Do you want to add anything, Keith?
Well, what I wanted to say is I like the way that you said they're like the curators, the protectors of that sacred knowledge, and uh, and what's amazing is that they can dance between that Western modality of knowledge as well, and they're scholars, they're musicologists, and so they're bringing not only the through the Chicanx and an indigenous and mestiza lens, all of this knowledge, but they're bringing it as practitioners, as just amazingly, gifted musicians, and also. To me, just really, they representing the beauty of the people. So, this is where it's at. This is real learning to me. So I'm really honored to have you two here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gavino and Keith, for those beautiful words. I mean, y'all really hype us up.
Giving us too much credit.
Too much. But I think like we always like to preface, and we appreciate y'all centering the practitioner component is, unlike some of probably your other class guests, we are not necessarily musically inclined or professionals or people who dedicate our lives completely to the sonic world, right? Or even to Yeah, well, we consider ourselves to be like rascuache artists, right? Artist practitioners, and we're very much committed to ensuring that people have access to spaces like Son Jarocho. Like Avino and Keith mentioned, we're also danzantes and we participate in Quetzalcoatlachli here at UNM, mostly because we have a deep commitment to these cultural spaces because we understand the value that they have for our community, right? And for our perceptions of self, right? And how we move through the world. And um, we are no way keepers of knowledge. We're more facilitators. And we just want to make sure that we can provide access to people to these kinds of spaces and information that we were so fortunate to have access to. And so with that, we'll start off on the very little bit that we know about Son Jarocho. Um, as we were talking with Gabino earlier, Gustavo and I are not from Veracruz, Mexico, where Son Jarocho originates. We come, my family's from Jalisco.
And my family's from Oaxaca, from the Central Valley of Oaxaca.
And we grew up in California, right? Different parts. And so this is something that we've been fortunate because other Chicano communities, because other people have fostered this knowledge and have shared it with others. And we're simply sharing what we have learned along the way, along the journey.
Yeah, so everything that we're gonna share, take it with a grain of salt, right? Don't believe everything we say. Also, do your own homework, right? Also, think about it, reflect on it, sleep on it, and you might find more information here that moves beyond kind of what I'm gonna be talking about. But most of what we will be sharing is stuff that we've learned along the way. From our early beginnings at Tia Chucha Centro Cultural up in the San Fernando Valley to everything that we've been doing here in Albuquerque and in Veracruz and so forth, right? So everything that we're gonna share, we've learned along the way, and it's been a beautiful journey up to this point.
So first, I'm not too sure. I know some of y'all have heard of Son Jarocho, but can we get like some thumbs up if you are familiar with the sound of Son Jarocho or the genre of music? That's a couple thumbs up. Yup.
So Jorge.
About half the group. Right. Beautiful. So we want to share a traditional son, right? So Son de Madera is a well-known group, right, collective in Veracruz who plays son jarocho, right, and they're particularly from the various parts of Veracruz. So we want to play a sound, what is known as kind of son tradicional de son jarocho. So we'll play that for you really quick.
And tell us if you could hear it. Let me see.
Entonces, ¿hacemos ese? Ok. Fandanguito. Sí, mi amor.
Okay,
There you
yeah.
go.
For some reason, it locked us in.
My bad. My bad. They last time we had someone and they played some weird ass shit whenever people were in, so I blocked everyone from being able to talk. My bad.
We're like, dang. Um, awesome. So just to give a little context, right? So Son Jarocho is traditionally from the coast of Veracruz, right? So as we can see on the map, it's along the Gulf of Mexico. We have the Caribbean, Cuba more specifically, really close by. But even though Son Jarocho is discussed as being birthed in Veracruz, because of kind of the coming together of the various cultures, Son Jarocho hasn't stayed in Veracruz whatsoever, right? And it has spread not only across the Republic of Mexico, but has across into the United States and internationally, most famously amongst the Japanese, right? The Japanese have a real affinity for Son Jarocho and have created their own collectives and sounds in Japan.
Yeah, and so this group specifically, has gone to Tlacotalpan and they've played there and they've learned from the folks down there. So it's been really interesting to see how Son Jarocho goes to these various places in the United States. There's groups in California, in Arizona, in New Mexico, in Texas, in Illinois, New York. There's probably even more that we haven't even documented. Know that of people who are getting together to play the music, who invite maestros, and who learn about the process and the reglas that are kind of taking shape in the community event and gathering.
So something that's really important about Son Jarocho and that we particularly or want to emphasize is kind of how Son Jarocho is birthed in Mexico, right? So um, I can imagine that as you've already learned in your class, right? Colonization and colonialism are important kind of political, social, and cultural ruptures that happen in this hemisphere that transforms our understanding of who we are and our cultural practices and traditions. And Son Jarocho is not an exception, but is very much dependent on this kind of political rupture for Son Jarocho to be birthed in this area. And so, what's something that we like to emphasize about Son Jarocho is that it's one of the tradiciones that in Mexico specifically that is explicitly Black, right? And that has explicitly Black origins that are not only at the foundation, but that have become essential in the dissemination and resurgence of Son Jarocho, where Afro-Mexicanos have really latched on to Son Jarocho as a form of expression and self-affirmation as Black people and part of the Black diaspora.
Which we will talk a little bit more about, no, but we wanna share this clip, right? Because part of what we're also kind of making an intervention on here is pushing back against the idea that there wasn't any Black folks going into Mexico or even what would we consider New Spain during 1492, right? So part of the colonial project, aside from having Spaniards come into places we would consider Mexico and Central America, the Caribbean islands, is an assertion of Spanish control over indigenous communities in these areas, but also simultaneously the bringing of African communities who would then be enslaved for the production of extraction of resources and the exploitation of labor and work. So part of this video highlights some of that. No, and you'll begin to see. Think about the dates, right? When we begin to see boats moving, where they're going, where they're stopping, why they're going into those directions, and what they tell us about the experiences and histories of Afro communities in Latin America. Right, so you even see in this time period where things are starting to shift, right? The direction of where boats are going is not necessarily South America anymore, but it's going into the Caribbean as one stop into the mainland, which we would consider places like Mexico and different countries of Central America. Well, at this time, New Spain, no?
Mhm.
Damn, that's
Mhm.
intense.
It's crazy too at like how much more of the boats are heading towards that direction in South America and Central America than even the southern United States. You know what I mean? So I think that's really like intense, like to just see all of that.
There was a little moment in the early 1800s where they started going into the United States, but even then, it wasn't as intense as you have it going into these other places.
Mhm. And what's important to know about the Caribbean is that the Caribbean was also a place of seasoning, right? So the islands function as a place, as the first arrival places for those who had been stolen to arrive to the, the new world, to be seasoned and prepared to enter the plantation life, right? So this is a place where essentially they're aimed at breaking people, right? Deconstructing their identities of self to create the slave mentality needed to be treated as chattel, right? And chattel slaves. And so the reason why we don't necessarily see boats enter into the mainland of Mexico is because they enter the Caribbean islands first, right? And that's why earlier we mentioned that Cuba is right there along the Gulf of Mexico, facing Veracruz, right, in that coastal area, because that's where they entered first and then were shipped off into Mexico. And so part of the Mexican imaginary is that Black people never came, right? Because there's no proof that they came in terms of like written documents with the slave in regards to the slave trade. And so part of the epistemic violence that's happening in Mexico and a lot of part of Latin America is that Black people don't exist and they're not part of the cultural historical memory of these spaces. But we see that that's the contrary. And Son Jarocho is important because it carries those stories, right? It carries those memories not only through the lyrical compositions of the decimas and the versos, but the sounds, right? And the composition of the music itself is rooted in those in that Black ancestry and those African indigenous epistemologies and way of understanding the world through sound.
Yeah, and then and which we're gonna go into a little bit, right? And also the indigenous aspects of music and poetry and spoken word is also deeply infused, as is also the Spanish traditions of music. No, so we begin to see how this fusion manifests Son Jarocho in various ways. Another thing I did want to mention, right, is that so because you see them going into these islands first and then going into the mainland, it doesn't mean that it was just one way, right? So within the slave trade itself, right, you have people moving from place to place, right? So they might be in the mainland, they get shipped to the islands, they might go down south again. So there's always a constant flow of people kind of migrating in these areas because of enslavement that is being enacted upon on the bodies of black communities and black people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. So Son Jarocho, right, like we're talking about during the colonial period, is really important. One, because Veracruz in particular. So during the colonial period, not only do we have the shipping of those who had been enslaved to Veracruz to work on the plantations, specifically sugarcane plantations. Whereas in the United States, it's cotton. In Mexico and Latin America, sugarcane is an important commerce. But Veracruz is also an area that is largely ignored by the Spanish in terms of indigenous colonizations because of the mountainous areas of Veracruz. So Spain is so concerned with Mexico City and the central component of the nation because that's where they see the imperial hub, that a lot of the communities in Veracruz are largely considered to be ignored and left in isolation. So that also, because of the mountainous regions, because of the plantations in the area, we have a lot of these communities, these sin marron communities, or maroon communities is how it translates, that are being developed and placed in conjuncture to indigenous pueblos who are left in isolation. But Son Jarocho doesn't begin to get recognized until after the Mexican Revolution. Um, After the independence and the Mexican Revolution specifically, where we start to regionalize Mexico, right? So Mexico, like many places, is not a unified nation, and it doesn't come together as beautifully as the Spanish and Mexican scholars would like us to believe, right? A lot of indigenous peoples, campesinos, mestizo communities saw themselves as independent from the national state, right? They weren't necessarily in alignment with the Creole elites. Um, and so after the Mexican Revolution, there was a major project by the government to create a homogenous understanding of who a Mexican is, right? And to integrate these regions into the national narrative of being Mexican, right? Nowadays, everyone's super proud of being Mexican. I think the World Cup demonstrates that. When we graduate, we have our Mexican flags. The Chicano movement exemplifies that when we have all our, Mexican flags, and our relationship to the language that's developed of La Raza comes from that. But it was a lot of work to create kind of this integration. And one of those elements is culture, right? And specifically regional culture. And so Son Jarocho begins to develop itself and define itself as a region of Veracruz, of the Huasteca area, which is along Veracruz, Tamaulipas, and Hidalgo. Anything else?
Yeah, so part of what Natalia is mentioning, right, is that there's a nation that begins to kind of take up Son Jarocho as a national project and begins to mainstream it in specific ways, right? But then simultaneously, while there's this streaming happening of Son Jarocho communities have their own kind of practice of what they do, right? So as the image presented here, you have the one up on top, which is more like the mainstream kind of representation of who are jaraneros, or who are fandangueros, what is Son Jarocho, and kind of the national sponsored depiction of him, right? And then at the bottom, you have the community depiction of, well, what is Son Jarocho to them? What are the ways in which they are themselves maintaining these traditions, and what does it mean for them is very different, right? So part of what we want to highlight is that while there's a top-down kind of assertion of adopting this music, there's also a bottom-up, right? And that bottom-up often means that there's regional community interpretations that center the social, the cultural, the political, and the economic dimensions of daily life. So every region has their own sones, they play it in their own ways, they have their own strumming, they have their own lyrics that speaks to the condition and the experiences of people in those areas, which is what makes Son Jarocho so rich and so beautiful in our current moment.
So like we've been already been talking about the formations of Son Jarocho, and it's not a linear process, right? It isn't that the Spanish come and they bring the guitar influence, and then we have the indigenous people there who bring their lyrics and poetics, and the African percussion, right? It's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that, right? It's often when we think about these kinds of colonial scholarship, they want to make it simple, right? Of like, first you have this element, then you have that element, and then you have this element that brings together this unique development. But what we see is that during the colonial period, up until now, right, we have complicated racial, economic, and gendered components that are influencing how music comes together. And so, although we simplified it in this kind of slide of like, Son Jarocho is coming from the Spanish guitars, the poetics, right, in terms of using the four stanzas, coming from the indigenous background, specifically the Nawa influence, and then the African percussions, those are just obvious, right? Obvious influences and elements that we can see in Son Jarocho. But we see how through survival and creativity, Son Jarocho is a much more complicated kind of mixture of all these elements.
Yeah, so part of what we're saying too, right, is that just because indigenous folks were poetic or they had call and response, it doesn't mean that their sounds weren't also included in the music itself, right? Or vice versa with African communities who are also coming, right? So it's more nuanced than this. And I guess this is just a way to try to say, hey, these are some of the influences and how they connect. But as we see, there's nuance in it. So we're gonna try to highlight some of those nuances.
So the first song that we listened to in the beginning of this presentation is called El Fandanguito, right? So we want to share a little bit of the Boroque style of music from Spain that, interestingly enough, is already being influenced by the music of Mexico at this point. But we still kind of see that back and forth. So, you know, Spain is being already influenced by the musical sound being produced in Mexico or New Spain. But then that production in Spain is now being thrown back to Mexico. And so we want you to listen to a Boroque style of El Fandango and just think about how it, you know, the tones of the guitar and the kind of up and downs that it goes through. Right. So a component that's really Spanish, right, in terms of its influences, the use of the string instruments, right? So string instruments are not particular to Mesoamerica or even parts of the west coast of Africa. It's very Spanish, and even that has its Moroccan influence, right? It's Muslim and Islamic influence that's influencing Spain, but the symphony of the string instruments we see in Son Jarocho, and when we go over the instruments, you'll see the different kinds. And in the first video, right, we saw how everyone had some kind of string instrument. We see that in kind of the Spanish Baroque style.
Profesores, do you mind if I interject with something?
Absolutely.
Yes, jump in.
So I was going to say as well that even the music of Spain had the nuances of a mestizaje itself, because it was already, influenced by the Árabe, North African, Moorish, Hebraic, Gitano influences that were already part of a mestizaje that was found within those rhythms.
Yeah.
So the mestizaje that mixture has always been, part of this. So I love hearing how when you talked about nuances, you hear that. Thank you.
No, of course, right? And
Yeah.
even like the video we're gonna share next is not necessarily like a drumming session from like the west coast of Africa, from the Yoruba region, where a lot of Black communities have identified their point of origin from. This is actually the Batan drums from Cuba, right? So we're already talking about how Cuba was a major influence, but they've also retained their unique kind of connection to the motherland through their drumming in a way that Afro-Mexicans weren't able to do because of the kind of the policies of New Spain that was very violent. I don't know if y'all talked about it in your discussion with danza, right? But drums are particularly and systematically seen as, when you're playing them, as an offense to the Spanish crown, right? So for danzantes, it was having your hands cut off. It was the same thing for African drummers, right? They were seen as a decolonial tool that was a threat to the Spanish crown, and so it was something that was abolished from use, particularly for indigenous and African communities in Mexico. But we want you to hear kind of that sound that comes from the motherland and their place of origin. So what's particularly important about hearing the drums is that polyrhythmic element that comes from the percussion, right? That is kind of really a really iconic element of the West African drumming, specifically like with the congos and the patan drums, right? Is that polyrhythmic element. So we can travel back to our memory to that first music video where we see Ruby zapateando, right? We really hear that. So those are the elements that kind of begin to bring itself together when we hear Son Jarocho, right? As this kind of collection and symphony of different musical traditions and epistemologies. And so we want to share another little video where we can kind of, I want you to take these different elements, right? The kind of boroque sound, the bata drums, and kind of start thinking about hearing these sounds together. But we also want you to add the element of la palabra, right? Of word, of versos. And so what's really important about this song, specifically La Candela, it's about an escaped slave woman who's traveling on a boat, right, that gets integrated as part of the storytelling of Son Jarocho. And so we're going to play a little bit of it so you can begin to hear those different elements really come together and bring life to this very unique sound of Mexico. great. So we wanted to make sure to emphasize this video at length, mostly because it highlights also the dancing, the zapateado that comes with son jarocho. So when y'all, if y'all, after this class are YouTubing or Spotifying son jarocho music videos, right? It's often, the music, right, of the lyrics and the strumming of the jaranas, but the dancing gets muted in those videos. One, because it's difficult to capture a zapateado in an audio, but two, it's just seen as something that's extra, right? Like it's just a compliment to the versos and the kind of the strumming of the jaranas, but really the zapateados are foundational, right? The tarima, which is the piece of wood that she's on, are central components to son jarocho that get ignored a lot, because we think it's just dancing, right? One, it's a gendered element of women are dancing, right? And so it's like, whatever, they're just there for decoration and extra razzle dazzle, but really, they're central figures. They keep the percussion. They're essentially the heartbeat, or what we would understand to be the drums of son jarocho. And the tarimo is actually what guides how fast the jaraneros, really similar to danza, right? It's actually the dancers who are guiding the rhythm and the harmony of kind of the music that's at play. But we also see how she was going counter to the music, right? She was acting as a complement to, or they were complementing her, as a sort of melody also, right? So not just acting as a percussion instrument, but as a melody to the son.
Yeah, so and something to highlight now that Natalia mentioned is that so the person who's zapateando, the people who are zapateando or dancing on the tarima, they're musical instruments, right? So and that's, I think that's what's very key, and that's what we've been learning, and what we've been taught, that they themselves are an instrument. They're not just dancing for show. They're not just there to look nice on scene. That they play a very important role in the whole in the whole music and the tradition and the community, in the composition of the music. So really quickly, we wanted to share a picture of the different instruments. We actually spoke way too long on that first part. We have more to this presentation that we would want to share, but really quickly, right, we see that there's different sizes and instruments. So there's the primera, which is the really small one. There's one even smaller that's half the size, that's a mosquito. This one that's a little bit bigger, kind of medium size, is the segunda. This one that's a little bit bigger right here is a tercera. So you see that there are different sizes, and as the sizes increase, it gets deeper and deeper. This one right here is a leona, so it's like a deep bass. Right, this is a requinto. So a requinto has 4 strings. Some of them have 5, right? As opposed to having 6 strings, which the jaranas usually have.
It's also known as the guitar jaranera or jarocha, right? So I know like Keith and Gavino both play, your professors play guitar, right? So it's intended to mimic the guitar and the melody that the guitars produce.
Yes, and then we also have a quijada, which is a donkey jaw. I think they also use horse jaws. And then we have the cajon, right? So there's different instruments that kind of make this ensemble together, that bring it together. Sometimes people use the harp. Sometimes people use the pandero, which is right here somewhere. We had stuff that we wanted to show you, but we know that time is ending. Right, the pandero.
The quijada, right? So there's many theories whether this is coming from the African ancestry or if it's also kind of the indigenous component, but ultimately, right, it's the ingenuity of musicians really who are taking something that is seen as disposable, as trash, and turning it into an instrument, right? So and then, of course, the Goro Harana, which kind of stands as the foundation.
So I think we might actually end it here. We did want to talk about Las Brujas Haraneras and who we are as a collective. We
Go ahead.
still
You guys have a little bit of time. You guys, we're fine.
we
Okay.
so we still do stuff here in Albuquerque, right? We've done a handful of different things. We host weekly workshops and practices. We haven't really had a chance to because of everything happening with COVID. But we also get have it's real nice because we get to bring maestros from Veracruz to come and share their teachings. And also we have here Esther who was teaching folks how to zapatear. I believe it was last year.
No, 2 years ago
Two
now.
years, damn, 2 years ago now, huh? Then we also had Patricio Hidalgo, who is a famous musician of Mexico who does stuff on Afro Jarocho. And so he's here hosting a fandango, right? They were also having a show, which we would love to share the video, but time is passing. We've also had amazing opportunities, and also we've been able to also go down to Veracruz and to also be there present with folks who are also playing the music. So this is Julio Cesar, who is also Julio Cesar Corro, who had hosted us last summer, I believe, at his home where it's in Tlacotalpan, which is like the epicenter of where many jaraneros go and learn and practice and go and convivir. And also they have different fandangos, and we had an opportunity to be there for a week and to live with him, to be at his house, and he taught us how to play different instruments, and he hosted workshops. We had a chance to go to his studio where they make the instruments, right? So where they carve them out and where they do all of that.
That was me pretending to work, not knowing what I was doing. And this is actually what's beautiful about the unique connection that Albuquerque has with Son Jarocho and Veracruz specifically is that this mural was commissioned by Francisco Lefebvre, who is a local Albuquerque, New Mexico artist. Um, who fundraised this money to help participate in the beautification of Tlalcotalpan, right? Like many regions of Mexico, it's the place that faces a lot of poverty despite kind of the fame that comes from Son Jarocho. And so part of Julio Cesar's kind of mission in his community is to help really amplify the beauty of the community through Son Jarocho. And so Francisco came and created this mural as part of the workshop and center that he's attempting to establish for Son Jarocho.
Yeah,
How
right.
much time do we have?
I think their class ends at 5.
It ends at 5.
No, we can go to however long you want. We're truly supposed to be here till like 5:15, 5:30. So we're good.
So part of the reason why we also wanted to end early, right, or why I wanted to end right when your class finishes, is because we currently have workshops going on with Ruby. She is actually the person who was at the very beginning of the first video that we showed with that group Son de Madera, and also she is actually hosting workshops for us right now virtually. So if you want to learn how to zapatear, if you want to learn how to the process of what it means to do the steps and learn about the history of Fandango itself from someone who's been practicing for a very long time, we highly encourage you all to stop by and to participate. We're having most of these workshops on Facebook Live. So if you follow us at UNM Chicano and Chicana Studies department, you will find and see all of the different workshops that we're hosting. So on Tuesday, we have them from 6 to 7:30, and then on Thursday, we have them from 5 to 6. And what's really nice is that she's really gentle. She's really nice, right? She's really welcoming, and she also teaches us how to do the steps, and she takes her time to really explain it, right? So as an educator, she's an amazing educator and really welcoming. So if that's something that you all want to participate in, right? Like we can't physically be with one another to actually play and to have fandangos, but we've been trying to do this online as a way to be able to get people to practice and to learn and to become part of the traditions that are currently going on.
Let's see. So we do want to open, I want to open it up for a Q&A. So like Gustavo mentioned, and you could feel his frazzled energy as we do most of the coordinating for the Son Jarocho elements that are happening through CCS, whether it be the workshops out. If we weren't in a pandemic, we'd be doing at the casita. But because we're stuck in the virtual realm, we've been kind of coordinating with Dora, who is Dr. Doris Cariaga Coleman, who is an amazing scholar in Chicano Chicana studies, who centers Afro Afro Mexico and Afro Mexican identity, who's been critical in providing access to these different artists in Son Jarocho. But with that, I'm going to stay with y'all for a few moments to have Q&A, any reflections, any thoughts that you might have. We have always tons of music videos to play that we can definitely share in terms of artists and the sound that Son Jarocho has taken here in the United States.
Okay, but thank you so much, Gus and Natalia. We appreciate you so much. Thanks for your time and for sharing your knowledge with our students. It's always a pleasure.